It was a cold, gray evening, the kind of evening when even the streetlights looked tired. Mark, a 38-year-old single father, trudged across the bridge on his way home from another double shift. His boots were soaked from the rain, his jacket thin and worn at the elbows. He carried a small paper bag from the corner store, milk, bread, and the cheapest cereal he could find because his little boy, Tommy, would be waiting at home, hungry but hopeful, always with that smile that seemed far too big for such a small face. Life hadn't been kind to Mark. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier after a long illness, leaving him with nothing but medical bills and a 3-year-old child to raise on his own. Since then, every day had been a fight, against poverty, against loneliness, against the crushing weight of hopelessness. He worked 2 jobs, slept maybe 4 hours a night, and still, sometimes, the cupboards were bare. Yet no matter how tired he was, Mark pushed forward for Tommy. As he crossed the bridge, he noticed something unusual. At first, he thought it was just his exhaustion playing tricks on him, but then he saw her, a young woman, standing on the edge, gripping the railing with pale, trembling hands. Her shoes were perched precariously, her body leaning ever so slightly over the rushing black water below. Mark froze. His chest tightened. He knew what he was seeing, and every instinct screamed at him to act. "Hey," he called out, his voice cracking from exhaustion and fear. Wait, don't do this." The girl flinched, but didn't turn around. Her hair, soaked by the drizzle, clung to her face and neck. She was young, maybe 19 or 20, and she looked so small against the endless gray sky. "Go away," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the water below. "Please just leave me alone." But Mark didn't leave. He couldn't. Something inside him, maybe the part of him that had spent years clawing for survival, knew he had to stay. Slowly, cautiously, he set the paper bag down on the sidewalk and took a step closer. "I can't walk away," he said softly. "I know that kind of pain. I know what it's like to feel like there's nothing left. But please don't jump." The girl's shoulders shook, and she let out a bitter laugh that broke into a sob. "You don't understand," she said. "No one does." Mark swallowed hard. He wanted to tell her he understood more than she could imagine, that he had sat in the dark some nights, staring at the bills he couldn't pay, wondering if his son would be better off without a father, who was always tired, always struggling. But instead, he stepped closer again, until he was just a few feet away. "My name's Mark," he said gently. "I'm a single dad. And the only thing keeping me standing most days is my little boy. He's waiting for me right now. He depends on me, even when I feel like I've got nothing left to give." Maybe you don't believe it, but someone depends on you too. Someone out there would break if you left. For the first time, she turned her head slightly, and Mark caught a glimpse of her tear-streaked face. She looked at him, her eyes red and empty, but something flickered there. "You don't even know me," she whispered. "You were right," he said. "I don't. But I don't need to know you to care. I don't need to know you to want to see you live. Please just take my hand." His voice cracked on the last words, and it wasn't just for her, it was for himself, for all the nights he had wished for someone to say the same thing to him. The girl trembled. Her knuckles whitened as she clung to the railing, torn between letting go and holding on. Mark stretched his arm out, his hand open, shaking slightly. For a long, fragile moment, nothing moved. Then, slowly, she reached back. Their fingers touched, then gripped, and in one desperate pull, Mark hauled her back over the railing and onto the sidewalk. She collapsed against him, sobbing into his chest as the rain poured harder. Mark held her tightly, his heart pounding, his own eyes wet with tears. "It's okay," he whispered. "You were safe. You're safe now." They stayed there for what felt like an eternity, 2 broken souls clinging to each other on a lonely bridge. When she could finally speak, she told him her name was Emily. She had aged out of foster care just months ago, tossed into the world alone with no family, no support, and no hope. She had lost her job last week, hadn't eaten in 2 days, and couldn't see a reason to keep going. Mark listened, his heart aching with every word. "Emily," he said softly, "you don't have to go through this alone. Come with me. My life's not perfect, far from it, but you'll have a warm meal, a dry place, and someone who cares, at least for tonight. You won't be alone." At first, she shook her head, afraid, ashamed, but the kindness in Mark's eyes broke down her walls. She nodded. That night, Emily sat at a tiny kitchen table across from little Tommy, who grinned at her with his toothy smile as he shared his cereal. For the first time in a long time, she laughed. A small laugh, but real. Days turned into weeks. Emily became a regular presence in their small apartment. She helped with dishes, read bedtime stories to Tommy, and slowly began piecing her life back together. Mark, still exhausted from his jobs, found himself lighter somehow. his burdens shared by someone who knew what struggle felt like. Months later, Emily enrolled in community college, determined to build a future. She often said, that night on the bridge would have been her last if not for Mark. And Mark often told her that saving her saved him too, because in reaching out his hand to her, he had found strength he thought he lost. Years later, Emily would stand proudly at her graduation, with Tommy in the front row cheering the loudest and Mark clapping with tears in his eyes. She wasn't just a guest in their lives anymore, she was family. And it all began with 3 words on a rainy bridge: don't jump. So if you are listening to this story tonight, remember, sometimes the smallest act of kindness can rewrite a life. Sometimes, simply refusing to walk away can change everything. And if this story touched your heart, I invite you to subscribe, because the world is full of hidden